Hey, so The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom dropped a while ago. I'm going to be talking about one of the main quest lines needed to complete the game, at least unless you're doing the equivalent of going straight to Hyrule Castle and fighting Calamity Ganon. Unless you're doing this game's version of that, then, well, major spoiler warning. As of releasing it now, it's been out about a month, so you've had time to play it, assuming you can get your hands on it. So, yeah, and if not, then please come back later. Trust me, you do not want to be spoiled. So, yeah, anyway. Okay, so as anyone who shouldn't have clicked off during that spoiler warning could tell you, there's the four main quest lines you need to do to beat the game in Tears of the Kingdom are the regional phenomena. They're this game's equivalent to the Divine Beast. Like, there's weird Ganon phenomena happening in all of the regions, with fantasy races in them. You know, Zora, Rito, Gorons, all that. And the one that's happening in the Zora region is called Sidon of the Zoras, and they're all named after their respective sage and the fantasy race. Anyway, but yeah, the plain premise of what's happening here is there's sludge falling from the sky, and it's like, one, it's gross, two, you can't move around in it, as well as also it's also poisoning the water. Now the water's all mucky and gross and like it's making the Zora sick, and yeah, it's bad. Okay, so back in Breath of the Wild, the whole Zora questline with like Varuta and all that was the longest of all the Divine Beast questlines for the simple reason that getting into Zora's domain was a whole lot of trouble with like going into like Goron City or Rito Village or Gerudo Town. Yeah, there's a little bit of drama with each of them, or at least there's a little bit of drama with some of them like Gerudo Town. But like for Rito Village, if you just wanted to go, you just had to go there. It's not really no hassle. Same goes for Goron City, albeit it is in the volcano area, which makes it marginally more complicated. But for the Zora questline, it was totally different. First, although the game did directly point you to it, what happened is you'd go in and you see Zora's domain, right? It's in the middle of this whole set of mountains, and they're very unnatural looking mountains. It's more like a giant wall of rock that basically forces you to go along through the intended quest line to get into Zora's domain, which sees you going along this big, long, winding road through the mountains, comparable to one of the Champions Roads from the end of a Pokemon game, in terms of how much length and how much stuff you have to deal with on it is. And so that already made that the longest thing in Breath of the Wild. Now bear in mind that you'd have to go through all of this again, except now it's more complicated, because sludge and falling rocks have messed up the trail, not to mention that the poisoned, grossy water is the same color as the path on the map, not to mention that there are stronger enemies now. So you have to do all of that just to start with, and it's a whole thing. Albeit I could give this questline the benefit of the doubt. The only reason I went to this whole little patch of the map in game so far was specifically to record footage for this video. As the way I got into Zora's domain is I took a rock, which was like the falling rocks. I took one of those. I reverse timed it. I forget the name for it. Rewind. That's it. And then that went into the air. Then from there I paraglided onto the mountains on the side. And to be fair, you could be argued that this is the intended way in, or at least a valid way in that the developers considered and allowed for. I mean, someone specifically put that falling rock there, so maybe you could argue that it's not so bad, but yeah. After this, once you get into Zora's domain, the first thing the request that you do is there's this statue in the middle of the whole domain, right? And it's covered in sludge, and you're required to clean it off using a splash fruit. Now, this pretty obviously exists as a tutorial of how the splash fruit can clean up water, right? Okay. However, if you drop a splash fruit on it, it's naturally gonna fall off. Same goes if you throw it the way you could in Breath of the Wild. And in this new game, there's a way you can throw it like a grenade. They don't tell you how to do that, and I've yet to figure out how to do that, so I was stuck awkwardly trying to climb onto it, drop it, and hit it before it fell off, which eventually worked, but still was a pain in the ass and honestly felt quite unnatural. So that's already a bad little bit of quest line, and also another thing that had to be done. And the weird thing is, there is another area where they have a tutorial for this mechanic, and it's basically like, you know, where I flew in from the west, right? If you fly in there, and then in front of the tower is blocked off by a bunch of sludge. That's what the actual name for the gunk is. Okay, and there's also a Zora there who's been caught in the sludge, and he tells you, oh yeah, just drop a splash fruit on the thing and then hit it, and the water from the splash fruit will wash away the sludge. And this teaches the same mechanic in pretty much the same way, except it's not a massive clunk fest. So yeah, it's stupid. Okay, so the next thing you have to do involves a character called Yana, who is the one who gave the task to like clean up the statue. But what she's doing, what you need her to do, is you need her to repair the Zora armor, and to do that you need to get an ancient Heroa. Okay. Now I believe that if you go all the way up to Sidon at the spring, which you theoretically don't have access to at this point, he'll tell you can get it at the Mifa Court, which is nice and easy. But otherwise, you're stuck looking around Sky Islands for it yourself, and that's assuming you've caught an ancient Heroa and thus have any idea what an ancient Heroa is. So that's a whole heap of trouble. It's like if you don't know what an ancient Zora is, then have fun trying to figure that out looking all over the map. I mean, it's ancient, which complies in the Sky Islands, because that's where all the so nice stuff is, but yeah, it's iffy. Maybe not. Plus, you might not think know where to find water on the Sky Islands, as these are often pretty desolate. Then, after you get an ancient Aroa, probably from the big Sky Island, Yana gives you the Zora armor, which allows you to swim up waterfalls, which is why I think you're not supposed to have access to the Mifa cores, and thus to the easy, obvious source of of ancient Aroa present there, because, this is the thing that allows you to get up there. So, yeah, I mean, I was able to get up there earlier by poking around at the dam and eventually finding a falling rock, but this seems like a marginal thing, not like something you're supposed to do, more like something you can do. You know? Okay, so then Sidon tells you to go to Toto Lake to go and examine this ancient rune, like slash ancient scripture written in the wall type thing. Yeah, no real trouble here. I fumbled it because I was stupid. That was on me. That was wholly on me. This wasn't bad design of any kind. Then I don't remember how because I played for this section of the game like 3 weeks ago. I'm recording this later. But you basically Sidon tells you that you have to find to go get the king in his secret spring and to actually find out where it is. You have to spy on some kids talking about it. I don't know. That was mildly fun and interesting, wacky fantasy game questline, I guess. But then getting into the spring, right? So it's behind this waterfall, right? And you're told to go that it's behind this waterfall, right? It's because it's behind the waterfall. So you go. I tried to glide in there with my Zora armor, and because of the way this game's designed, when you glide into a waterfall with the Zora armor, it automatically makes you start swimming up. In fact, I don't. At the time, at least, it seemed like anytime you touch a waterfall with the Zora armor, you start swimming up. Unlike Breath of the Wild, where you had to hit A. I think you can slip under with the armor on, but either way, I find myself having to take the armor off to step under the waterfall to finally get into there. And at this point, we then see the Poison King, and he gives us his scale because the reason we were going to talk to the king was so we could get his scale because it was believed it was needed to fulfill a prophecy, basically. So basically, we get his scales, and the point is that this also is actually how I learned to put things on arrows, like fusing things to arrows. I learned this. It actually taught me how to do that whole mechanic pretty well, so I'm not complaining so much about that. That's a good thing. But we're told we're gonna have to use that and shoot something with it. It's a whole esoteric prophecy. But then we go back up to the spring on our way to try and find where that is. And suddenly we talk to Sidon to try and figure this out. And suddenly we find ourselves having to fight a boss in the form of the Sludge-like. Okay, so the likes are these weird worm things that are coming out of walls that try to eat you, right? They're kind of annoying to fight, but they aren't the worst. But the Sludge-like is really annoying, because we have to use Sidon's special power of water to basically wash off all of the sludge, so we can actually make any attempt at hitting it. But the problem is, it's spewed sludge everywhere, which, 1, makes it hard to walk around because you're walking around the sludge. 2, Sidon's ability takes time to recharge, and cleaning up just a bit of the sludge uses up his ability. And 3, if you're not careful, it can easily bite onto you and just eat your weapon. So that whole thing is frustrating. It's randomized what weapon it eats. On top of that, it has a very high HP bar, and it can also... I don't remember if it can take you out easily. I think it can, but either way, the Sludge-like was a very frustrating mini-boss. It can destroy your weapons, it's hard to move around in its fight, it's hard to hit it with the actual water attack you're going for with it, albeit I believe a splash arrow can work. Also, not to mention, this thing has a bogus amount of HP for a mini-boss. Bear in mind that this isn't like your typical Breath of the Wild mini-boss like a Stone Talus or Lionel or something where it's supposed to be harder than the actual bosses. No, this is just a random prelude boss, and it has bogus amount of HP. Including Tulin and what's the name of the Goron champion, Unobo, as well as Sidon, who is also fighting him with me. I died several times to this fucking thing. So, yeah. Okay, so before the Sludge-like fight, Cheeto, who's the king's... What's the name for the thing? It's not the Jester, the Jester's like a clown. I forget the name. The king's guy named Cheeto tells you to go to this area called... I literally just looked this up. It's something bridge, but he describes it as a fish-shaped island. And what he's talking about is this vaguely fish-shaped island. I could not recognize it as a fish. And he talked, and basically around that, there's a whole bunch of like these glass-like, metal-like, I don't know what they are, things floating around it. And he tells you that you need to shoot the king's mark, aka his scale, through a water droplet. And if you stand at just the right spot, and then you'll find several of these metal thingies aligned to form the shape of water droplet. Now, I went around there looking for 20 minutes, unable to find this. I was only able to figure out this whole thing by looking up a guide online, which you have to stand at just the right spot to find it. It's a whole thing. Like, when I couldn't find, like, you know what I couldn't follow, how I was talking about, like, Toto earlier and how it was stupid? I brought that up for a reason. Because I ended up going all the way up into Akala, thinking maybe that's the lake it's talking about. Then I ended up going for the tower, and I ended up trying to fly over to the dungeon from the Akala Sky Archipelago and succeeded. It's just the whole area didn't really work because Sidon wasn't there. But yeah, this was genuinely, I think, far too cryptic. So yeah. Okay, but after we shoot this arrow through the waterfall, because of the trajectory you're shooting it from, it ends up landing in the reservoir, and so it forms this little light area. I went over to the arena. I found nothing happened. Eventually, after poking around there several times, I ended up climbing up one of the fallen rocks, like the rocks that fell from the sky. And I climbed up there, and Sidon was standing on there. You talk to him, then he swims around in a bunch, forming a whirlpool. If you go into this whirlpool, you then fall down into this little dungeon where you have to basically blow up these little corks, well, not corks, but like they're big masses of cobblestone which are blocking pipes. They're stopping water from flowing in to gradually flood the dungeon so you get to the top. It's a neat little mini dungeon. It's not too bad. I mean, I had trouble finding Sidon, so he'd actually open it, but it's in roughly the area you'd expect people to go, given that attention's being drawn to the area by the massive aurora borealis created by the arrow landing in that spot. I had some frustration trying to find the last pipe and ended up just fusing a bunch of boards together. I really don't know how much that's my fault / the game's fault. I mean, at this point I was already planning this video, so if I was to say, yeah, it's just bad design, I do feel like that would kind of be confirmation bias. On the other hand, I genuinely spent like 15 minutes trying to find the last pipe and couldn't find it, so take that as you will. So then, after we beat this little mini dungeony type area, a waterfall starts coming down from the Wellspring of Hyrule, which is the area in the sky, a set of things in the sky, Zora architecture where all the sludge is coming from. So you inside on swim up the waterfall, and then you have to go for this whole area to actually get to the proper dungeon, the whole proper water temple, or through all of this. And yeah, it's a bit long. All of these areas you have to play through with the sage to get to the dungeon are a bit long, but they're all nothing offensive. Then the dungeon's main mechanic is about water, specifically draining the water. You've got to use Sidon's water power to turn these turbines to like activate the switches so you can so you can switch the things, so you can force the boss to fight you. It's nothing special, nothing offensive at this point. So then we get to the boss, which is called the Mukta Rock, which is a pretty obvious Splatoon reference. For one, both are cephalopods which spew ink onto the ground, which they can then swim through, in spite of the fact that they presumably aren't digging a hole in the ground by shooting that ink, and they are bigger than the puddle of ink on the ground in terms of depth and yada yada. In addition, the squids can turn into humans, not into humans, but into humanoid beings. And then the Mukta Rock, it turns into this giant fish salmon thing, which in turn, rather obviously inspired by the salmonids from the Salmon Run mode within Splatoon. And yeah, that's a whole thing. In addition, the ink within Splatoon is it's easily washed away by water. If you jump into water, you die in Splatoon. And oh look, guess how we get this thing to go into its vulnerable cephalopod state from its big fish state? Oh right, we hit it with water. Yeah, it's a big reference. Oh, also we move slowly in the sludge, and if enemy teaming can Splatoon, slow. But then there's the Mukta Rock boss fight, which is not so good. Okay, so it turns into its giant salmon form, and then you have to use Sidon's water attack and hit it, and then that turns it into its octopus form where it's all weak and you hit it, and that's fine in principle. But there's several problems with this fight that really irk me. For one, it's this one attack where it jumps up and then it slams into the ground, creating this massive AoE attack of basically sludge puddling out away from it, and I had like 8 hearts by the time I did this fight, right? And this thing fucking one-shot me. with like 8 hearts, and on top of that, it moves out faster than you can run away from it. I mean, it's quite easy to get a situation where it does this attack and then, oh well, gotta start the fight over again. And then on top of that, in its second phase, it spews ink everywhere. Not ink, sludge, sorry, I'm getting confused with the Splatoon. But anyway, it's hard to move. It makes it almost impossible to really move around the battlefield chasing it, which again, this thing moves quickly along the battlefield, swimming along as through the ground as its giant fish forms, so if you're stuck moving slowly, it's a problem. And again, you can wipe this sludge away with Silence Water ability, but then that uses it up for like 30 seconds. And then on top of that, hitting with a splash fruit starts working rather inconsistently once you get into this phase. But yeah, it becomes impossible to do. It also becomes impossible to hit it once it becomes... Sorry, I'm distracted trying to kill him off right now. But anyway, it becomes impossible to hit it in octopus form, because basically it starts jumping around between these puddles of sludge faster than you can keep track of it, to the point where I just had to resort to using bomb arrows on it. Like bomb arrows and when you're falling in Breath of the Wild and you shoot an arrow, it goes into slow-mo. That was the only way to handle this damn thing. So, yeah, that's my problems with that boss fight. So, actually analyzing this regional quest line, for one, it has us do more steps than the others, 9 or 10 depending on if you include the trek to Zora's domain. So, yeah, that's a whole thing, and the problem with this is it makes the whole thing tedious. So going around this feeling of it was basically like not a wild goose chase, I forget the term for the thing, but it's like, not a trade quest, but it's like, oh, I have to do this tedious thing, I have to talk to this person, then I have to talk to this person, and go through this person's dialogue tree, and then figure out this little thing. And it got tiring at a certain point. It was like, every new task it gave me is like, am I gonna get to do the dungeon now? So that was a whole big load of trouble. In fact, I forgot a bit of it. I forgot one of the tedious little steps that I was going to note because of how many there was. Instead of it just forming the whirlpool when you shoot the arrow, instead you have to find Sidon. Sorry, I had a hiccup there. On top of this one rock next to it, and then he makes the whirlpool out of a bunch of light that is made by the impact of the arrow in that area. And it does not tell you where Sidon is. I found him by fucking around trying to get footage of the gunky water for this video. You know? And just hammering in on the whole steps thing one last time, the other original quest lines only have you do 3, 4, 5 steps each. Like, the Gerudo had 5 steps in first going into the whole bunker, then actually going in and doing the little sap training with what's-her-name, with Riju, then doing the fight at the town, at Karkar Bazaar, then doing the fight at Gerudo Town, then lighting up the various statues in the distance. It's like 5 steps, and that puts it at the high end among other regional quest lines, in terms of the amount of things you have to do before you can do the fucking dungeon, whereas this one it's like, it's 9 or 10, and this tedium was not made better by the fact that some of them were actively confusing and frustrating steps, like the statue step or the Fish Island step, to name 2 particularly egregious examples. Those were actively confusing and very dead-endy for quite a while in my little playthrough. So, in conclusion, the Sidon of the Zora regional quest line is the worst of all the regional quest lines in Tears of the Kingdom, because it takes forever due to having a whole bunch of tedious, little monotonous, fidgety little steps, often of which are very confusing, making them a pain in the ass to actually execute, to the point where you're just waiting for it to finally be over, because it gets fucking stale. The Zora aren't that fucking cool, and yeah. Oh, not to mention the fact there's 2 bosses, both of which are very annoying to try and fight. So yeah, that's a nearly 20-minute long video I'm gonna have to edit in the coming days before when I intend to upload it, so that's hell. So yeah, if you enjoyed it, if you watched this far, you clearly enjoyed it, so please hit the like button. It pushes my video in the algorithm, benefits me for making this content for you, which you enjoyed based on the fact you watched it for this long, and also costs you nothing. And if you want to see more, hit subscribe. Now, I'm gonna go have a cookie because this is gonna be a pain in the ass. Like the quest line, lol. Okay, so I finally finished that. So its production took over a month. I initially had the idea while I was playing for the quest line that I was talking about. And admittedly, my enjoyment of the quest line might have been dragged down a bit by the fact I was trying to make sure I had enough footage, and so they kind of dragged some of it down later on after I knew I was making the video. Bearing in mind that I didn't want to play through the game again, so I had to do this on my initial playthrough.
and also the fact that listing footage was hard because I had to also save footage to my iPad from the Switch and then delete it because the Switch only lets you have 100 clips. No, it's just like a flat rule. You can only have 100 clips. It's not like you can have this much storage, data storage in clips, or this much data storage in the whole like images, not images. I forgot what it's called. The whole screenshots app. No, you can just have only 100 clips or whatever. It's stupid as hell. But regardless, that was a bit of trouble. But yeah, well, I recording the audio was a whole bunch of trouble just because I was recording it all way after actually playing for the thing, so that meant I had trouble recalling it. So I had to actually do some research to actually recall it again. And again, editing a 20-minute long video trying to get a deadline is troublesome, and yeah, it's ended up being 3 days late. So yeah, that's a thing that happened. What's it? Uh, yep, I hated it at the start, I hated the end, found it kind of fine at the middle. Yeah, I have this thing I often get into with projects called one-shotism, or what all I call one-shotism, and it's a really dumb thing I do, where it's like, oh yeah, I want to do this in one sitting, where it's like, I rarely do good art anymore, because I'm like, oh yeah, I sit down and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do this all in one sit, I'm going to do this art right now, and I just don't end up getting started, because it's like, oh my god, this is so much to do, or it comes out like crap because I'm rushing it. I also do this with audio, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to sit down and record the audio for this video. With the implication of this entire thing, or I'm going to sit down and edit this video, and yeah, it's stupid. I need to get better at just doing things in multiple steps. I've acknowledged this for the last 4 months, and yet the problem persists. Ugh. But regardless, compared to most videos I hated making, I think this video's come out pretty high quality, so yay, I guess. I don't know. Peace, lol.